Welcome to College Football Playoff Selection Show, presented by AT&T 5G.
Uncertainty has engulfed the entire season, but today is a day for judgment. Selection day for the college football playoff. Data and debate, metrics and merit, questions, circular logic, perhaps some exasperation, but also cornerstones of clarity. Alabama and Clemson, the definitive programs and rivals of the playoff era, certain to be ensconced at 1 and 2. But the other two spots? Well, Notre Dame split a pair with Clemson, but yesterday's blowout loss at the hands of a full-strength Tiger team dredged up memories of the Irish being overmatched against the elite. Ohio State looks the part, undefeated Big Ten champion, but the Buckeyes have played 3 fewer games than the other undefeated team in their own state, and their entire schedule is shorter than Texas A&M's current SEC winning streak, which started after a loss to number 1 Alabama, a game in which the Aggies were completely overmatched. Look, all of these arguments are valid, but at some point the selection committee has to make a decision, and that point is now to find out who's in.
Uncertainty. If that's been the word of this year. The truth is, it's their word every year. Every season, every game, through promise and pain. For all they've fought against, to have this second in time to know how they rank and where they stand. It's why they've persevered and played, continued and competed. Conclusive and decisive, brutal and final.
If we can't play in this league and be in the playoffs, something's wrong.
To be the answer to the question, the proof to the doubt, the fact to the theory. The College Football Playoff. Who's in?
This might be the toughest job any committee's had in the 7-year history of the college football playoff. There is Gary Barta. He is the chair of the selection committee. He will join us to explain the logic, explain the rationale, how the 4 teams are chosen a little bit later on. 13 people in a room on even schedules. Pandemic impacted the season from start to finish. But through it all, Clemson emerges again as ACC champions. There's likely to be a socially distanced pizza party that has become a tradition at Clemson. Pizza party is synonymous with the Tigers on Selection Day these days as they wait to see where they are. Likely, they will be number 2. Clemson, the ACC champions, conference championship games on Saturday at least provided another data point for that selection committee to evaluate. Ohio State was tested. They pulled away when they started giving the ball to Trey Sermon. What a performance from him.
I mean, an all-time leading rusher in a single game in Ohio State football history. There's been some incredible backs and a good response.
331 yards for Sermon. Then with Trevor Lawrence back, Clemson took care of Notre Dame with ease, 34-10. Lawrence, the MVP of the ACC championship game, 6 in a row. And then Alabama and Florida. What a shootout last night.
Yeah, that three-headed monster for the Tide. Unbelievable. Mac Jones, he basically secures his Heisman bid. Najee Harris running and catching. Devontae Smith, incredible.
And then Joey, Cincinnati, conference champions, first time since 2009, won it at the gun.
I've had so much respect for what Cincinnati's been able to do. Not a lot of respect in the room, dropping a couple spots the last couple weeks, but they've been an outstanding team.
And we have reporters everywhere. Chris Lowe is at Alabama. Crimson Tide expects to be number 1. Marty Smith, we'll see if he gets a slice of pizza at Clemson coming up. Gene Wojciechowski rocking the great orange tie as the Buckeyes wait. And we have news from Ohio State that we'll share momentarily. Jen Ladd is in South Bend, Chris Budden in College Station, and Holly Rowe in Cincinnati as the Bearcats, probably not terribly optimistic, but still hopeful after finishing a perfect season under Luke Fickell. Glad to have you with us. College football playoff selection day is here. I'm Reese Davis. These are my nights, and this is our roundtable.
I love it.
Kirk Herbstreit, David Pollack. Jesse Palmer, Joey Galloway, and we'll have people throughout the day. So what do you expect to hear from the committee coming up in just a few minutes?
Well, I think you brought up a great point, is that this is unprecedented, the fact that we have teams that have played a different amount of games. And while it seems to be a consensus this morning that the 4 teams would more than likely be with Alabama, Clemson, Notre Dame, and Ohio State, I think we all want to know the order, but we all just still want to see how the committee handles that aspect of 6 games versus Texas A&M or Cincinnati or some other teams that have obviously played more.
Well, and we didn't have any out of conference, so we didn't have any of that to measure either. So the strength of record, the metrics of what's been important, it's been, I mean, I think it's safe to say it's been kind of up and down with the committee. It's been hard to figure out. A lot of times we can really put our pulse on what they're looking at and what's important to them. I don't know that we've figured that out yet.
We will today, yeah.
Today will be interesting.
Yeah.
Notre Dame versus A&M, Joey, I think is the debate that people are pointing to, and I think it's a good one for Notre Dame. That's why you got your green blazer on.
Yeah, unfortunately, I don't think we're going to get the debate that we enjoy on this show as we're here for 4 hours. The 4 teams to me look like they're set with Alabama, Clemson, and it just depends on which order you put Ohio State and Notre Dame. But those are going to be your 4 teams. We'll just see what those matchups are going to be, and that depends on who you like better at 3 and 4.
Yeah, we know it's going to be Bama 1. We know it's going to be Clemson 2.
Yeah,
the question is, you got an Ohio State team that's played 6 games, won a Power 5 championship, and a Notre Dame team that played 11 games and an A&M team that played 9 games, didn't win their respective conferences. And how does the committee decide to decipher that? I'm expecting it to go Ohio State, Notre Dame, Texas A&M. If that happened, the committee would avoid the rematch possibilities and scenarios. It'd be interesting to know if they talk about that and they think about that as they evaluate who these top 4 teams are.
They'll tell us in a little bit.
Well, we've got a lot of time for that.
Gary Barr, and the one thing to remember about the process, and I tried to get Cavman, our producer, to get a whiteboard out here so I could go all beautiful mind and show you how they never get down in their process and their protocol to just saying, okay, let's decide between Notre Dame and Texas A&M.
Right.
Because they do it with a listing step and a ranking step. So you have groups of 6 and then groups of 3 with teams added to it. So there's always more of that.
Should they change that?
No, I think it's the proper way because it doesn't exclude. Then you don't exclude Cincinnati. Yep. They're in the process there.
And one thing to remember in the past, in a normal year, when you have a cluster like a Notre Dame, Ohio State, a Texas A&M, a Cincinnati, they look for head-to-head. They look for conference championship. They look for common opponent. There are things that they've used in the past. The only thing that really applies here with the cluster would be conference championship with Ohio State playing 6 games. Was that enough for them? And then with A&M, and Notre Dame, you don't have the conference championship.
Yeah, and then you got 2 teams that are 1-loss non-champions, which they've had in the past to try to evaluate, but there's not a lot of precedent to rely on. Now, there are 3 teams that we believe have the best chances of getting in. Look, Alabama and Clemson are locks. We think that Ohio State, with that 6-0 record and the eye test and all of that, will probably get in. Let's start with Chris Lowe, who's in Tuscaloosa. Chris, Crimson Tide coming off that thrilling victory against Florida. Well, what are they expecting today?
Well, I can tell you this. The last person who wants to give up 46 points, Reese, you know, is Nick Saban. But there's a feeling here inside this program that playing a close game is not all bad. Crimson Tide has not really been pushed this season, and that will serve them well going into the playoff. Listen, they had to field an onside kick. They had to make some stops defensively. They had to run the ball when they needed to. Those are things when you have to grind it out potentially in a playoff game, it's not bad to happen. Now, last night's win, a little bit bittersweet. Landon Dickerson, who's been the rock of that offensive line and really the emotional leader of this football team, going out with a knee injury. They're still waiting on the official MRI results, but the fear is that he will not be back in time to play in the playoff. Stand by. I'll throw it to you, Marty, in Clemson.
Thank you, Chris. Good morning. As we know, Dabo Swinney is the king of slogans. His message to his team at the outset of 2020 vision, double-double mission. Well, they achieved that double-double last evening by winning a 6th consecutive ACC championship. That means they're just the 3rd FBS program ever to achieve double-digit victories in 10 consecutive seasons, but it has not been easy. Swinney said it's always hard to win 10 games in a year, but in 2020 he called it, quote, miraculous. Earlier last week, I asked him to describe the journey for this program. He said, total chaos, uncharted waters. It's like driving on unfamiliar roads in the dark with no headlights. He said he's never been prouder personally or professionally of any group. And Reese earlier mentioned that it's probably pizza party day. He's right. They're right over here to my right in the indoor practice facility enjoying that customary pizza party, socially distanced, of course. Now let's head up to Columbus, where my man Gene Wojciechowski is with the Buckeyes. Gene?
Thanks, Marty. Here at Ohio State, I guess there's a combination of apprehension but more confidence. Some of the players have walked by our setup here and have asked, are we in? Justin Fields, the starting quarterback, is actually outside fixing a flat tire on his car. They really don't know what's going to happen. But remember, this is a program that only had 2 spring practices. They had their season postponed, then canceled, then resumed. They didn't play their first game until late October. They've had 3 regular season games canceled, but they still found a way to win 5 regular season games, win the Big Ten championship against Northwestern. Northwestern head coach Pat Fitzgerald certainly endorses the idea of Ohio State making the playoff. And Reese, Ryan Day, after that game last night, said, look, if I could pick one team to play any game against anybody else in the country, I'm taking Ohio State.
And Gene, it remains to be seen just how close to full strength Ohio State will be. Gene reporting earlier this morning that Ohio State has gotten word from the Big Ten. The decision has been made. Now, what that decision is, they don't know yet, about whether the protocol the Big Ten has implemented of having players who tested positive for COVID out for a minimum of 21 days could be adjusted. Now, we don't know the answer to that yet. Big Ten apparently, according to some reporting that Gene did, has made it a decision. We'll find out what that decision is a little bit later on. So if those 3 teams are in, there's still one more spot. And we don't know for sure if Ohio State is in the field, though that seems likely. 3 others vying for 1 spot, Notre Dame, Texas A&M, and we think Cincinnati, though they haven't gotten a lot of respect in terms of rankings from the committee up to this point. Let's start in South Bend with Jen Latta. Jen?
Hey there, Reese. Sometimes you just have a bad night. That is pretty much how Notre Dame quarterback Ian Book is summarizing his team's loss to Clemson in the ACC championship. Today, I'm told the team is disappointed but confident. They believe it was the anomaly because you look at the other 10 games they played this season when they were consistent, when they did execute, and they think that that should stand for something. Brian Kelly saying, testing your team week in and week out matters. They also are hanging their hat on those 2 top 15 wins, Clemson and, of course, UNC. But this team, guys, is confident that if they get back out there and are able to wash the bad taste they have from this game out of their mouths, they would perform at a high level again. Today, no pizza parties here in South Bend. They did do COVID testing a little bit earlier. There is a grab-and-go brunch. The TVs, of course, will be tuned in to this very show. Guys are welcome to kind of stay around for a few moments and watch, but also encouraged to keep social distancing. Obviously, Notre Dame hoping that they did enough throughout the season to prove to the committee that they can be the very first team to lose in a conference title game and still make the college football playoff. We'll see. Now we'll send it over to Chris Budden, who is with Texas A&M.
Thanks, Jen. You know, it was quiet here in College Station all week leading up to their final game against Tennessee. Jimbo Fisher didn't want to get into the debating until his team took care of the Vols on Saturday. And as soon as they did, he let the campaign begin, telling them that, hey, they went 8-1 in an all-SEC schedule. That only loss was back in early October against Alabama, back when they had a healthy Jalen Waddle. They then finished the season with 7 consecutive SEC wins, and Jimbo Fisher noting that's more games than some teams played all season. A slight edge to the Ohio State Buckeyes and their schedule. Now, things are very relaxed around here. The players are coming up to get treatment, a few shouting out their car window, "Are we in yet?" Kellen Mond told me he is feeling good about today. And they got an extra vote of confidence from Athletic Director Ross Bjork, who said this morning, "We hope to be in the top 4, and we expect that." Now let's head to Cincinnati with Holly Rowe.
Thank you. I'm here in Cincinnati where the Bearcats have won 20 straight games in this stadium behind me. Last night, they took care of business to win their conference championship game in a blinding rainstorm in freezing temperatures. Luke Fickell told me after the game, we deserve to be considered. They have done everything the committee has asked. They're undefeated at 9-0. They're a conference champion that the committee tells us is important. They also have 3 top 25 wins this season. Their quarterback, Desmond Ridder, told me after the game, with tears in his eyes, we have overcome so much adversity. We believe that we are a great football team. And guys, they are having a very quiet morning as well. They've had to COVID test this morning after being here till almost midnight last night. They are excited to see if they're in, but they're also very realistic. No group of 5 team has ever made it into this playoff conversation, but they believe they're deserving. The word they continue to say is, we deserve to be considered. And if you really look at the stats, if you're looking at the eye test, guys, they are one of only 2 teams in the country to be in the top 20 in both scoring and total offense and defense. The other, Clemson. That's a pretty good eye test, and the Cincinnati Bearcats hope they will be fairly considered. Reese?
Holly, it may well come down to the fact that because of the pandemic and the lack of inter-conference games and non-conference games, that Cincinnati wasn't able to prove it on the outside, and part of that is reflected by what you see in strength of schedule. The Bearcats ranking 77th. That's 10 spots below Ohio State, while Texas A&M and Notre Dame are both in the top 15 in the country. And all of these things are part of the mosaic that you put together a picture of these playoff contenders and try to make the best judgment you can. And once you put in the full body of work, then the full body of talk comes to play, Polly.
It feels like election season all over again, doesn't it? Like it's all the politicians are standing up there and telling you what you need to know about their teams. And this is why it would be really cool to expand the playoffs and be more inclusive. But it is fun to watch teams. Listen, they're supposed to go to bat for their team, right? Like I'm supposed to believe that we've got a great shot to win this thing. We should be in. We deserve to be in. The kids love hearing that on their teams. I can promise you that, and they'll fight for that. But it is definitely politicking going on.
Well, I think if you think about these teams that are trying to stand up for themselves, the coaches, of course, we hear that every year. I'm going to stand up for 2 teams that aren't on any of these graphics. That would be Georgia and Oklahoma. You know, I mean, I know we're focused on these other teams right now about, you know, their resumes. But if you want to just put teams right now at the end of the season on the field that you don't want to play, I don't know about you guys, but Georgia right now with JT Daniels, Oklahoma. So, I mean, we could expand this as far as you guys want to go.
8 would be great.
8 would be great. 12 would be great. I mean, if you give the top 4.
Peaking at the right time.
Huh?
Peaking at the right time.
Yeah.
Yeah, no doubt. You know, I think that the big discussion coming up here is going to be who's the 4. Is it Notre Dame? Or is it Texas A&M? And I think there's really interesting comparables for that committee to have to discuss through. Both have looked good from an eye test standpoint, balanced on both sides of the ball, Joey. Both have blowout losses against good teams. I think it's going to end up coming down to the resumes of those 2 teams. You'd think that gives Notre Dame the edge, and it'll be interesting to see what the committee comes up with.
Yeah, I would be stunned if it's not Notre Dame and Ohio State sitting in there at 3 and 4. Ohio State, I'm thinking the committee will put them at 3. And Notre Dame at number 4. Texas A&M had a terrific season, 7 straight wins. You look at their resume, the one win against Florida, terrific. The other wins, not so great. I see them staying out. I don't think this is really a debate. The only debate, who's at 3, who's at 4.
And real quick, the other debate with Coastal Carolina, we haven't even talked about them with Cincinnati, just based on the wins that they had.
If they had an opportunity to play, don't you think? They were able to play Louisiana again, but that game was postponed. But you're right. A lot of their numbers are very comparable to Cincinnati, at least in terms for that New Year's 6 bid. Now, one other team that I would stand up for, if Florida hadn't blown the LSU game, can you imagine a 3-point loss to A&M and then that game?
Can you imagine watching that game last night if they didn't blow it against LSU? What was at stake?
Okay. Wow. Yeah, I know. Amazing. Yeah. All right, I want to remind you of this. We haven't seen the rankings, but I'm told they're in. The most powerful man in college football right now is our graphics operator named Zach, because he's putting in the rankings, and we're going to see them all together coming up. Gary Barta will answer some questions about it. We're going to show you the rankings and who's in college football playoff.
And I haven't lobbied, I haven't said a word, but I'm going to know that you're 8-1 in the SEC. We lost to the number 1 team in the country. I don't see somebody else go 8-1 in this league. Now, I've watched the games. I've seen everybody. We can play with anybody.
We've got 2 top 15 wins. We've got a win over this Clemson team that was number 1 in the country. I don't know that anybody has a resume that has those 2 wins. And we played 11 games. I think that puts us as, without question, as one of the top 4 teams in the country.
I got to tell you what, this is one of my favorite teams I've ever been around. They've been through so much, and they just don't flinch. And I'll say this: if we had to play one game against anybody in the country, I'll take the Ohio State Buckeyes.
College Football Playoff Selection Show is presented by AT&T 5G and in part by Allstate. You've never been in better hands. You're watching College Football Playoff Selection Show, presented by AT&T 5G.
Alabama, Clemson, Ohio State, Notre Dame, Texas A&M. Who's in?
College Football Playoff National Championship Trophy presented by Dr. Pepper. That is the Holy Grail. This is the 7th year of the playoffs, started in 2014 and will commence. And in case you missed it, one of the semifinals scheduled to be in the Rose Bowl in Pasadena has been moved to Dallas. The other one will be in New Orleans, both played on New Year's Day. This is the College Football Playoff selection criteria. They rank the teams based on the committee members, 13 of them, evaluation of their performance on the field. That pretty much is self-evident. Some of the criteria: conference championships won, strength of schedule, head-to-head, comparison of results. Now, the criteria is only loosely binding. It's something they use in their total evaluation to rank these teams, with the object being the 4 best teams. Not necessarily what has been termed most deserving, although in my judgment, if you're going to be best, there has to be a deserving component within the definition of best. So I am told that we now have the rankings, at least the top of them in. Eventually, throughout our 4 hours together, we'll show you the entire top 25, the New Year's 6 bowl matchups, but we have to start.
I forgot we start at the top. I forgot.
We start at the top today.
Usually good. Okay. Usually Tuesdays we work our way up.
On Tuesdays we count it up.
This time we're starting.
You can fill in 1 and 2. You can just.
No. Well, you know what? Let's do that then.
Let's go.
Top of the rankings, College Football Playoff Selection Show. The rankings presented by AT&T 5G. At number 1, I believe we're going to see Alabama. Every even-numbered year of the playoff, Alabama has started at number 1. They have not won the national championship in any of those years when they've started with the number 1 seed.
Good nugget right out of the gate. Reece.
Yeah.
Full morsel. At number 2, Alabama's won it twice. And who is number 2? Yes, we know. The Clemson Tigers, they've also won it a couple of times. Finished runner-up last year, losing in the national championship game to LSU. So there is no surprise.
We could have done that before the season. We could have started.
Perhaps, and let's see what the reaction is in the pizza party.
Golf
clap.
Let's stretch. Golf clap.
Let's get a quick stretch.
Six straight college football playoff. Here we go. Get some pizza.
The top 2 teams, there have been 7 playoffs, and the top 2 have been in 6 of them. They missed different years. Clemson missed the first year. Alabama missed last year. So order has been restored.
Now, are you going to 3 or are you going to 6?
I'm going to 3.
Oh, we're about to find out what's up right now.
We're going to find out what's up right now. So at number 3. Drama.
Oh, my goodness.
Wow. Ohio State. And the big number that you see, 11, 10, 6. But it didn't hurt the Buckeyes. So the Buckeyes are in at 1, 2, 3. And for the second straight year, Clemson and Ohio State in a semifinal.
And the way that game ended last year, some controversy. There's going to be some hype and buildup of obvious that aspect of it. But remember, because Ohio State was in the top 4 last week, you talked about it. They could win almost with a safety. It wouldn't have mattered. If they were going to move them, they would have moved them last week. And the fact that they won the Big Ten championship, I think everybody expected them to be where they are.
And I think also, don't you think it was a product of the way Notre Dame lost? You know, if Notre Dame had lost.
A competitive game, they're sitting at 3.
Yeah, maybe.
Maybe.
But you might have tried to avoid the rematch. But
here
now
we
they
go
have
at
to
4.
answer that question.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
No, we're not going to go to 4. We're going to do something.
We're going to do something
take
else.
Some time right here.
Yeah, we're
going to walk it off right now.
Oh yeah, you know.
So look, I want to be clear about this, because Ohio State fans, I don't know if you guys particularly are aware of this. Sometimes they get sensitive when you say that. Are you at all surprised with the 6 wins? They're really good. They can win the whole thing.
Absolutely.
They've only played 6 games. But is this justified to have them at number 3?
Absolutely justified. This is a football team that, from the very beginning, before they played a game, everyone thought they were a top 4 team, a top 5 team. They played one game, they're already up there in the AP rankings. Yeah. So the respect for this team has been there all along. They go 6-0. Of course, they wanted to play more games.
Sure they did.
Everyone wanted to see them play more games. That's not their fault. But to go 6-0, a Big Ten champion, beating a top 10 team in Indiana, now knocking off Northwestern, number 3 is where they belong, and they've earned it. Nothing was given to them. They've earned it, and they deserve it.
I think if you're in the committee, you have to be impressed also, I think, sometimes by the way they've won. We've seen Justin Fields struggle mightily throwing the ball in their biggest games against Indiana and Northwestern. Both those games, Master Teague, Trey Sermon, they run the ball, they grind it out. 300 yards rushing against Indiana, 400 against Northwestern. They've had to win games shorthanded without their head coach, without offensive linemen, key players on defense. I think winning the conference championship, Reese, I think was the tiebreaker for them in the committee's eyes, moving them.
I would just add, they haven't played their best game. They played a good half. They've not played 60 minutes yet. Now, I don't know if they're capable of with trying to build that continuity in the next, whatever it is, 10, 15 days to get ready to play their best game, but they've not played their best football yet.
You know, and the other thing that we've mentioned with them, we'll find out what the Big Ten ruling is, how many of the guys, and also some of it depends on when they tested positive, all of that. And now Ohio State's going to go into this thing by far freshest, and if they get some players back, healthiest team of the bunch by virtue of the fact they've only played 6 games. So now we know 1, 2, 3. There's only one more spot for who's in. At number 4. Drama building.
Drum roll.
Notre Dame.
And that's what we expect.
We pretty much, nailed that. That's what we all expect.
Well, Alabama and Notre Dame will play in a national semifinal. They met prior to the playoff era for the national championship at the end of the 2012 season. And part of the performances like that is why people were questioning Notre Dame, not through the season, but after yesterday.
And they're going to hear about how bad they are all the way up to this game, and it'll provide motivation. The question will be, will this be enough to be able to kind of level the playing field?
To me, it's not how bad they are. It's just how bad they are relative to how good Alabama is.
No, I'm just talking about the game that they played. And I'm not saying they're bad at all. I'm saying they're going to hear that, and it's going to definitely, you know how it is in college football. You get motivated.
Coaches love this position right here.
Oh, my God.
If you're a team, like
Ohio State and Notre Dame are the winners here when it comes to that.
Where it's like, hey, call us the underdogs, we're on the other bus. Dabo always used that. These coaches love being in this position. We just come off of a bad loss. People are doubting us after the season we had. They will be motivated and come out with an attitude.
Okay, and here's where the games are going to be played. Alabama and Notre Dame is the game that was the Rose Bowl. Remember, I told you a few minutes ago, that's not going to be played in Pasadena now. It's going to be played at AT&T Stadium in Arlington, going to be played in Dallas. That's Alabama, Notre Dame in the Dallas area. Clemson and Ohio State will be played in New Orleans in the Sugar Bowl. So you have that rematch in the Sugar Bowl, and then the national championship game played in Miami on January 11th. Let's see who is just on the outside looking in. I expect it's going to be A&M.
Yeah.
Texas A&M is number 5. Now, there was a feeling throughout the rankings that because they lost by 4 touchdowns in their lone loss to Alabama, they had a good win over Florida, really good win over Florida. Yeah. But that they maybe had hit their ceiling. That 5 was kind of it for them, unless, barring utter catastrophe, there wasn't room for A&M to move up, and I think that's probably proven.
Yeah, I think ultimately the resume is what keeps Texas A&M out of the top 4. And Jimbo will talk about this. 9-game SEC-only schedule, and that's great. But they've only beaten 2 teams with winning records inside the SEC.
Maybe, but you say that, and Jimbo's going to look at you and say, Ohio State's strength of schedule is 67.
But they beat 2 top 14 teams. Texas A&M beat a Florida team, and that's great. The LSU loss for the Gators really hurt Texas A&M's resume. The only other team A&M beat with a winning record is Auburn. They've got 6 wins. So that's the reality. You lose by 28 points to the number 1 team in the nation. I'd love to know this when you talk to Mr. Barta. Did the committee say, do we want to see Alabama, Texas A&M again in a semifinal?
They're not allowed to do. Tell him, Reed. They're not allowed to do
well,
that.
They're not supposed to. But I think his point's well taken. It's human nature. I mean, you think about it a little bit, right? We'll continue this. Let's see who's also at number 6, just behind. I think this would be an interesting case study, just in terms of how they evaluated teams. Who's number 6? Oklahoma.
Seriously,
skyrocketing.
Cincinnati.
You don't want to play Oklahoma.
Yeah,
I'm telling you.
I don't think you want to play Cincinnati either. And once again, we keep seeing that other. Yeah, exactly. It is like you talk about Texas A&M hitting the ceiling. Cincinnati must hit a ceiling also.
Yeah, I agree.
I mean, they hit it and bumped their head and came back down.
And start moving the other direction. This makes me laugh, and honestly, this is the area of time when the other team, like the other group of 5 teams, should say, look,
don't make our own play.
Yeah, either start respecting us or at least tell us why you don't respect us. Like, tell us you're not going to let us get there. Let us know what this is, because we keep watching this thing, and they keep going the wrong direction at no fault of their own.
Okay, fair, and I agree with everything you're saying. But if you evaluate right now, because they weren't able to play non-conference games, their numbers don't measure up, so you rely on football judgment. When you watch Cincinnati, okay, right, exactly. So when you watch Cincinnati play, do you think that they are better than
Oklahoma?
Wait,
Go ahead.
Say
Yes.
Oklahoma. No, but
Yes.
let's say
Say Oklahoma.
He's
Say
talking. No,
Texas
no.
A&M.
You're talking about getting in. Are they better than Notre Dame?
They're
Dame's
not better than Notre Dame, but what I would say is they're better than Oklahoma. They're right there with Texas A&M, and that's but that's the thing. That's the way we do this, though. So if you said to me that last week Cincinnati was better than Oklahoma in the rankings, they go out, they get a win against Tulsa in a downpour. How did Oklahoma now become better? So in a season we're talking eye test, Reese, not just resume, because you just said about the strength of record. Take Ohio State compared to those other teams we talked about, it's not the same. So if we're going eye test, when I watch Cincinnati play every single game this season, I would not sit here and say that A&M is better. I would not sit here and say Oklahoma is better.
See, I look at Oklahoma as an example of a team that got better as the year went on.
Absolutely.
Think about what they lost when they came into this world of COVID.
Yeah.
You know, CeeDee Lamb, their two backs. Trey Sermon ends up at Ohio State.
Who just rushed for
Kennedy Brooks.
Something in the Big Ten
Kennedy Brooks
game.
opts out. You lose Jalen Hurts. They're playing a freshman quarterback. They're trying to figure out who they are at receiver, trying to find a back. Stevenson's suspended. He didn't come back. They were a totally different team once he came back. They avenged their one loss where they had a big lead against Iowa State. They weren't able to do it. Still Kansas State's a loss.
Right.
But if you look at the way from the Texas game on, the way they're trending, I'm just, again, put them on a field. I wouldn't want to play Oklahoma right now.
I agree with you.
I think they're a different team than when they lost those two games.
Say Cincinnati started 1-2. We'd have never heard of them again.
Right.
I absolutely agree with you that Oklahoma has gotten better. What I disagree with is when we start doing this thing on 2 consecutive Tuesdays when Cincinnati drops a spot when they don't play.
Right.
So when we come into this weekend, and Oklahoma's ranked behind Cincinnati. Cincinnati goes out, wins their conference championship, and they still get jumped again. That's where I start to have a problem.
Well, the only way that's ever going to change is we expand it.
Well,
I mean, that's it.
Agreed.
Well, then they need to tell Cincinnati, they need to tell UCF, they need to tell Boise. These teams, tell them that. Well, the only way this is changing if we expand it.
Maybe so, but there is a way, although my confidence has been shaken a little bit this year, I would say. The way in for a group of 5 team is the opportunity that Houston had, I think, 2016, when they beat Oklahoma, who went on to win the Big 12, when they beat Lamar Jackson in Louisville, won the Heisman Trophy, and was division co-champions with Clemson, but didn't make the ACC championship game because they lost head-to-head in a close game. Won those 2 games, but then they didn't handle their business in conference. That type of resume could potentially get you in.
Well, and it's
but
the other thing to remember Boise State. Like, remember Boise State? They build a brand over time.
And UCF
over years. UCF is a different team. If UCF is 5-0, we're all alerted. They're going to move up a lot quicker. It seems like if you're a group of 5 team, you need a couple years, and your conference needs a couple years of consistency in order to. That's what Boise State did.
Before we lose this, I want to point out about the difference between what Oklahoma accomplished yesterday and what Cincinnati accomplished. Exactly. That's what they beat Iowa State.
Number 6 that we also talked about on Tuesday night. Why were they at number 6? We're talking about a number 6 that lost. I get what you're saying if we're looking at numbers and looking at resumes. In this season, when we're looking at the eye test.
Joseph, you put Oklahoma on the field with Cincinnati. Dead serious. You put Oklahoma right now, the way they're playing. Forget about the rankings. Oklahoma, the way they're playing today with Cincinnati. Who you honestly think?
With Cincinnati, the way they are playing, not just today, the way they played all season long, that defense of Cincinnati, not just man-to-man, punch you in the mouth, knock you out, the schemes, the things they do, absolutely right now, I feel very confident they could absolutely jump on the field with Oklahoma.
Okay.
Does that mean beat them, or does that mean just jump on the field with them?
Well, he said put them on the field.
And they'd win. Would they win the game?
They win?
All right.
I would take Cincinnati.
Bear, what's that spread of Oklahoma-Cincinnati? You got that?
I'll tell you. Yeah, because Vegas is always
Bear,
right.
Bear,
they are.
I just got a note from my buddy Danny Sheridan, Bear, at least as it pertains to, I'd asked him this morning. Ohio State, Cincinnati. Ohio State, 20-point favorite. Oklahoma, Ohio State. Ohio State a 15-point favorite against Oklahoma. So it stands to reason that the odds makers wouldn't put Cincinnati in that group, right?
No, not at all. I think the problem is people out there get so infatuated with the zero in the loss column. And that is an accomplishment. That's a goal. You win your conference. You win every game. But at the same time, you're operating under the assumption that all teams, all conferences are created equal, all schedules are created equal, and that's just not the case. And Kirk mentioned Oklahoma. Like one of the reasons for the playoff and why people were steering towards a playoff was maybe it would allow a team like Oklahoma, who you lose a couple games. Remember the Florida State argument in the 80s and 90s when Miami would beat them? And by the end of the year, Florida State's the best team in the country. I only wish they could get a shot at the title. That's kind of, I think, where we are with Oklahoma right now with what you're talking about. I think this Oklahoma team right now is better than some of the Oklahoma teams that have gotten the benefit of the doubt into the playoff over the last couple of years. But I think the committee made the right decision with Notre Dame, getting back to 4 at Notre Dame. I think they made the right choice with Notre Dame at 4.
Notre Dame, Oklahoma would be a 3-point dog to Notre Dame. Notre Dame, Texas A&M, just for the record, would be even. At least that's according to our good friend Danny Sheridan. So right now, Rose Bowl game presented by Capital One. Remember, again, I keep reminding you of this. It's going to be played in Dallas, Alabama. Opening as a 17.5-point favorite against the Fighting Irish. And then the All-State Sugar Bowl, Clemson is a touchdown favorite against Ohio State. And we can only hope that game lives up to what it was last year when they met in the semifinal game. A great win that Clemson pulled out. Joining us now is Chris Fowler, who will be calling a semifinal game and also the national championship game. Chris, I don't know if there was a ton of controversy leading into this. I think we all sort of felt like this is the way it would go. What's your reaction to what you've seen from the committee in the top 6?
Yeah, Reese, as you know, it's always the what will happen versus what should happen conversation. Sometimes they're very different. Committee, having waited on Ohio State in recent weeks, as you guys said, made it pretty clear they were not going to drop them after winning the Big Ten, even though it wasn't their best game against Northwestern. But if you talk to the coaches, the what should happen debate doesn't include Ohio State getting into this bracket. And I've never heard in the 7-year history now of this playoff, coaches of teams who are tracking towards the playoff, like Dabo Swinney and Brian Kelly in this case, so vocal about another team being included they don't think is deserving. And it was Ohio State in their case, not personal, they said, just the fact that they were well acquainted with how tough it was to get their team ready and on the field and through Saturday after Saturday, and to only do it 6 times wasn't the same as doing it 11 times. So they strongly felt that Ohio State or any team in that position should not be included, which makes it, as Kirk alluded to, a very salty backdrop for Clemson, Ohio State when they collide down there in Arlington.
Yeah, it's going to, the backstories will be a lot of fun for sure. And it's understandable. Look, that's a reasonable thing. I mean, Ohio State's had a couple of years in this playoff, Chris, when they didn't make the playoff solely because they didn't navigate the schedule. They didn't win games they should have won. So we'll continue to talk to Chris throughout the day here as our college football playoff selection. Of course, Chris will be the voice of the national championship game and one of the semifinals. Trevor, you guys know where you're going yet? Semifinal yet? Has that been decided?
No, I
do.
I don't
guarantee you, it's got to be Alabama.
I know where we're going.
All right, well, we'll see.
You guys hear where we're going?
Anyway,
Down the hall.
All right, here's the top 4. Alabama and Notre Dame in the Rose Bowl game presented by City and Capital One. It'll be in Dallas. And the All-State Sugar Bowl will be Clemson and Ohio State. And joining us now to talk through some of these decisions is the chair of the College Football Playoff Selection Committee, Gary Barta. So, Gary, I'm going to start, even though they weren't the last team in your bracket, in the 14 bracket, but with Ohio State. Why did the committee decide, contrary to what a lot of accomplished coaches have said, that 6 games justified enough resume to put the Buckeyes into the field?
Well, the committee decided that Ohio State belonged in the field because they're undefeated. They had beaten 2 ranked teams throughout the year, including last night, and they won their Big Ten championship. So that's why the committee decided it. Certainly, we've talked a lot since the beginning of the year that there would be a differential in number of games played. But in the end, it came down to the committee feeling strongly that undefeated, beating those ranked teams and winning a conference championship.
But a conference championship that is about half as long as some of the others. Was there objection in the room in terms of the discussion to the number of games that Ohio State played?
there's been discussion all along about, you have undefeated Alabama, you have undefeated Ohio State, you have undefeated, I'll go down the line, Cincinnati, Coastal Carolina, San Jose State. We knew that was going to be a problem, and we were addressing it along the way. But in the end, there was not dissension in the room about naming Ohio State in that third spot.
Gary, understanding the restrictions of the pandemic and the different paths that conferences chose to take in this season, it's easy to see why you would have uneven things. But there's also the school of thought that if you can just keep the 0 in the loss column, you can play 6 games, you can get into the playoff. What impact do you anticipate this has on scheduling in the future? Because teams could say, look, I just have to keep the 0 in the loss column. Doesn't even matter how many games I played. What's your reaction to that?
Well, as somebody who lives on campus and deals with scheduling, I can tell you there's never been a season like 2020 coming into this year. And I certainly hope, for a lot of reasons, that there won't be a season like this again. So I think it would be a challenge to use this year, the pandemic year, to try to estimate how one should schedule their football seasons in the future. And I really don't think that'll happen, because I think people do realize that this was an extremely unique set of circumstances.
And I think many would believe, but perhaps some skepticism, that this could be a one-off situation. For the last spot, you had Notre Dame 4, Texas A&M 5. Both teams, one-loss teams with decisive losses at the hands of the teams that you have 1 and 2. What gave the Fighting Irish the edge over the Aggies?
Well, you painted the picture of 2 teams that have really similar resumes. They've played similar schedules. Coming into this weekend, Notre Dame was undefeated. They had beaten the number 2 team now in Clemson, and on the road against the number 13 team in North Carolina. And Texas A&M's top win was against a very good Florida team. So very similar resumes, but in the end, the committee felt like Notre Dame had earned its way there based on the complete analysis of the resume, and that probably came down to having an additional win against a ranked team.
And then in terms of the matchups, and the Rose Bowl game has been moved from Pasadena to Dallas. Historically, an SEC champion would go to the Sugar Bowl. Why was the Alabama-Notre Dame game placed in the Rose Bowl in Dallas?
Again, related to the uniqueness of this year, the number 1 seed, the number 1 team is by the committee is always given the benefit of the doubt or maybe the biggest advantage. And in this case, we know that there's going to be 16,000 fans able to watch in Arlington, and we know that there's going to be 3,000 fans that are going to be able to be watching the game in New Orleans. So the committee decided that the advantage was for the number 1 team to have more fans able to watch them play.
Okay. And we've talked a lot, and we haven't seen where the committee wound up with Cincinnati ranked, but it has been a big point of discussion up to here, and the evaluation of group of 5 teams. And you and I have discussed this earlier. Mike Oresco, the commissioner of the American, saying, well, maybe we might as well go back to the BCS, because if you're not in a Power 5, you don't have a fair shot at this. What held Cincinnati back? What kept them from? I mean, obviously they weren't in consideration at all for the top 4. They're not even in the top 6.
Well, I don't know that anything held them back. The committee has great respect for Cincinnati. They're undefeated. They won their conference championship last night in a last-second field goal. A terrific team, but it's comparing them to the 6 teams you see on your board. And it was just believed by the committee that those resumes are stronger than Cincinnati's resume.
All right, Gary Barta, who is the chair of the College Football Playoff Selection Committee, joined us on Tuesday nights all year. We appreciate that. And when we reveal the rest of the rankings and the matchups in the New Year's Six Bowl, which also the charge of the committee, Gary will join us once again. That'll be about 2:30 Eastern Time. Gary, thank you very much. All right, Gary Barta there. So what's your reaction to what you heard?
I thought he made a strong statement when he said that the 6 games almost wasn't even a factor. You know, all of us on the outside were like, oh, how's this going to play in? And coaches even said, this isn't fair. We're playing 11, they're playing 10, they're playing 12, they're playing 6. There's no way. They should have to go through it. In that room, whether you agree or disagree, it sounded like it was almost like.
He said no dissension.
Nothing.
Yeah.
Nothing.
I mean, he made it very
non-factor.
clear.
I find that difficult. That 13 people, there wouldn't
I'm
be
sure they
somebody
discussed
in that
it,
room
but just based on what he just said.
What he said,
No, I know what
it
he
didn't
said.
sound like there was a lot of.
You know, the first thing he said too with Ohio State was, and he says this a lot, is undefeated. Like, as much as you want to talk about like scheduling in the future, undefeated matters to him.
But I would say forget COVID in 2020. You go from 14 to 19. There have been years when teams have been undefeated and they've lost the benefit of the doubt where they've played a weaker schedule. Baylor comes to mind in 14 where they played whoever in non-conference, and at the end of the year, it kind of caught up to them.
Yeah, they lost the game, though.
I know, but I'm just saying Ohio State goes from 6 to 4 because a lot of it, if Baylor would have played a big-time opponent in non-conference that year, so I still think there's heavy weight for playing a conference or non-conference games that are going to help your schedule.
And he talked about Notre Dame getting in at 4 over Texas A&M and how the committee looked at the entire resume and the strength of schedule and who they beat, and ranked teams was a big factor, obviously, for Notre Dame. And I agree with Notre Dame getting in at number 4. People are so focused right now on them losing by 24 against Clemson in the ACC title game. People forget they were 10-0, dominant and complete with big, impressive wins that you can't devalue against Clemson.
People forget that North Carolina win. And then what North Carolina did against
them
Miami.
number 10 Miami and
blew
them out of the water. North Carolina could end up in the top 13.
Well,
I think that really helped Notre Dame.
I really believe Notre Dame is justified and deserving and should be in this playoff. And I think Ohio State is capable of winning it all. But I think the argument is valid. 6 games, that's an advantage now. It might have been a disadvantage before. It is a huge advantage to Ohio State in terms of freshmen. And Adam Rittenberg is now reporting that the Big Ten is going to drop the protocol time from 21 to 17 days. Some of the cardiac testing and those protocols will remain. How many of the Buckeyes, that means they get back in time for Clemson?
I mean, Chris Olave could get back at receiver?
Potentially.
They'll have
whenever he tested.
We've seen this.
Yeah, and if he
Was it strategically
if he can't,
though?
they'll move that down
We're going to
to
have
14.
Brian Kelly, the Fighting Irish, got in, coming off a disappointment, but now a fresh start against Alabama. Brian Kelly joins us when you come back.